Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our PRC Saltillo guest webinar. I'm Heather Prenovo. I'm a Saltillo AT consultant and training and implementation team member. I'll be moderating your webinar today along with Bet Waitley Fever and Lisa Tim. We're excited to have Kristy Davies with us today to talk about evaluating for AAC through telepractice. Evaluate via Tele-AAC will help you learn about evaluating the AAC through virtual platforms. Next slide, we're going to go through some housekeeping details. If you're having any trouble hearing or connecting to our webinar, you try logging out of GoToWebinar and coming back in. If that still doesn't work, then we will have you restart your computer. Otherwise, you can try contacting LogMeIn, the developers for GoToWebinar, and see if they can troubleshoot that with you. There are training materials in the handouts section of the toolbar. They are available during the class. There are PDFs in there that have your ASHA information, as well as the handout for today and instructions on how to turn in the ASHA CEUs. If you have any questions, please type them into the question chat window. We will be addressing these with the presenter at the end as time allows. On the next slide, we would like, if you have ASHA registry, you will be able to submit the ASHA participation form within the next 15 days to have them register your ASHA CEUs. When you do this, please make sure you include today's date on the form and the name of the training, Evaluate for Tele-AAC. Instructions and this form, as I mentioned, are in that handout section. You will be emailing them to info@printrom.com. And in the subject line, please again have the title of the class and the date so that they are able to put this together for those CEUs. If you do not use the ASHA CEU registry, you will still be getting a certificate of attendance that you can use for your PD hours. Kristy Davies, her disclosure information is here. She's presenting and receiving a small stipend for today and no other relevant non-financial relationships. This course is being offered for point 1 ASHA CEUs. You must stay on the webinar for the entire time. It is time-stamped. And with that, we want to turn things over to Kristy Davies. We appreciate having her here today to share her expertise with us. Kristy, here you go.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kristy Davies, and I just noticed a little glitch that my non-financial, obviously I am an ASHA member, so I apologize for that, and I can fix that. Again, I'm Kristy Davies. I am a speech language pathologist and AAC consultant in the South Jersey, New Jersey area. And now, due to telepractice, we cover all of New Jersey as well. And today I'm going to talk to you about Tele-AAC evaluations specifically via online platforms. So, just want to say, bear with me because I'm so used to reading body language and I'm so used to picking up on cues. So staring at my screen is going to take me probably a couple slides before I get in my groove. But the one thing that I can say with pure truities is that I find AAC evaluations beyond exciting. The idea of doing it about online, while it can be a scary thing, it's also an exciting venture, but in many different ways. When you realize the lives that we are impacting, with our evaluations and the time with the family online, we feel the reward of getting so much more bang for your buck, if you can think of it that way. And so what I mean by that, and I don't mean to overgeneralize, but primarily the evaluations that I do currently are in the school setting. So we privately, it's still more pediatric than adult, even though there are, a small percentage of adults. So I am kind of overgeneralizing to that, saying that when I get a call for evaluation in the school setting, the parent has a minimal participation, right? So due to the nature of the evaluation process in a school setting. So I'm not really here to debate that part of it, but what I mean really is that, there might be a possible parent interview or maybe a call, maybe even a meeting. Obviously, best practice is to have that meeting, but the 9 times out of 10, that parent's not physically in the evaluation room with you, right? Just like they wouldn't be for some other standardized speech language assessment. Typically, a parent might not be there, or I should say, very rare. So with that said, it's exciting to have the parent or support personnel front and center during the process with Tele-AAC, so they can see my wheels turn and what I like to refer to as Dr. Housing it. I'm not sure how many of you remember House, but that was one of my favorite TV shows back in the day, right? He was so beyond brilliant in his analysis of medical problems. So when I'm by myself in an evaluation, I keep all that analysis inside. But when I'm doing Tele-AAC evaluations, I have to share what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and why I'm doing it. And these things are important so that support personnel, the parent, caregiver, whoever it is, they understand my process so they can do what I'm asking, when I'm asking, and how I'm asking it. So the goal of the evaluation is the same, whether it be online or in person or a mix of both, some hybrid format, is we want to facilitate the most effective communication possible across a variety of environments and situations. I think that's clear, right? It doesn't matter for in a school, in a clinic, in a hospital, at a home, over the internet. That primary purpose and goal is still the same. The elements are not unique to Tele-AAC. First, again, understanding the client. Second, understanding AAC and its most updated evidence-based practices. And third, the information about the most updated devices and AAC systems. So uniquely, I won't go off on a tangent there, but I do like these elements. I'd like to think about them because they're not always thoroughly understood or considered or perhaps even respected in that regard. To know our client is to know their community, culture, family outside of their strengths, their areas of need, the communication goals, etc. And this is where Tele-AAC can really kind of gleam and show all those things potentially more, and we'll get into that. Evidence-based practices is saying just that, right? We want to make sure that we are searching ASHA and other related sites for the most up-to-date research on AAC evaluations, and now more particularly AAC evaluations online, which is what we're here today to talk about. Information about devices is always such a sticky situation in my eyes because so many of us are accidentally considering the individuals around the technology we have available to us compared to considering the technology out there to the client's profile and needs. So what I mean is many times I hear, well, I have an iPad, so I just bought a few apps, or my district gave me and the other SLPs an iPad, so we just had to let them know like an app or two to buy, and these apps are very expensive. And so these are the things I hear. So that clearly diminishes the concept of evidence-based practice and knowing all the client's needs and the information about the available AAC systems. Back in the day, not too far ago though, I even heard we have an old Vantage or Vantage Lite, so we use that, referencing they use that over an accent. When really I just thought to myself, how could you assess that, right? The touch screens are so different, the processing speeds are so different. How could you get a clear picture of the client's abilities? So to say the client, fails or what have you, like who's to say that AAC is not appropriate? It's just to say that a Vantage Lite is not appropriate. And so that's our goals there. So a little bit of a comparison, in-person versus Tele-AAC. Some of it is obviously stating the obvious, but to start an evaluation in person or online, obviously the beginning's the same, at least for me. The request comes in, whether it be a referral, an insurance, a parent email, phone call, fax, a school district. And so therefore there's a need noticed or known, right? And so there's a fact-finding process that occurs through observations, record review, interviews, surveys sent out, whatever that looks like, that fact-finding, going through all that case history per se. The part that can be a little different between in-person versus Tele-AAC is the observation can now have some differences that are known. So in person, obviously you're observing in real time. Perhaps you ask a question as to why you're observing what you're observing. You obviously try to be, the fly on the wall during an observation, but there is that ability to quickly chime in and inquire for information. It's a brief segment of time. It doesn't matter if you're there for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, or to be honest with you, even 2 hours. It's still brief in the grander scheme, the broader scope. And depending on your business or your evaluation model, you most likely only get one opportunity to observe. And again, it's just a little bit of the reality of it. In a perfect world, yeah, you would go out there a couple times because no one is ever the same in any same day. So with that said, you might not be privy to real-time observation outside of what you saw, meaning, dinner at home, something on the playground, watching TV, a certain lesson, making it up. You saw language arts over math, vice versa, science. If you're doing an evaluation in the clinic, you might not be privy to things at school or home that could be valuable information. So through Tele-AAC, you can ask specifically for the parent to record 2 different scenarios or environments, and you can be the detective as to the communication available at that time, and with those different skills or concerns that you're looking for. I go out of my way not to tell the family that I'm looking for times that are problematic, as I don't want them to paint a picture in my head. Most times families don't always necessarily understand what other areas are a concern or what a communication breakdown looks like. What they think communication breakdown might look like is when it's like absolutely too late, but really there was all these other breakdowns that might have occurred. So taking videos to send for observation is a really great tool that Tele-AAC can really capitalize on. Not to say you can't do an observation via real time over, a online platform with Tele-AAC, but it is sometimes more efficient just to get those videos and be more hybrid-like in that. An in-person evaluation sometimes presents with limiting schedule issues. Say you work potentially, 9 to 3, 8 to 3, 9 to 4, whatever, or geographic difficulties that also come into play with outpatient facilities, university clinics, schools, etc. Whereas obviously sessions online allow for that freedom. Not to say our time is invaluable, but really it's to say that everybody values and respects their time differently, that perhaps you want to work extremely early in the morning or you want to work extremely late at night. And that's the great thing to have that diversity, is that families feel the same way, that life isn't cookie cutter in a 9 to 3 box. Really, some of my best trainings did occur at 8, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, when myself plus the parent might have put our children to bed, and then we can get down to, the nitty gritty and get some training done. Because we had no other divided attention. Everything that needed to be done was done. And that's really important and a really great thing about the Tele-AAC. Clinical concerns in person versus online for me are definitely a big difference. And what I mean by that, and maybe it's just me, but things are much easier to support in person than they are in line. But it's not to say we can't handle or support families with their technical challenges via Tele-AAC. It just might potentially hold a session momentarily or postpone it until the problem's resolved. So in person, clearly, I go in there understanding any of the devices that I'm throwing in front of my student or client or whoever it is. And that's the responsibility on me to make sure that I understand all the technical aspects of whatever it is that I'm evaluating. And I can quickly modify, adapt, or fix a problem most times. If it's online, I have to try to coach somebody who does not have that same knowledge and skill set that I do. So it's not to say it can't happen. It just means obviously we're adding more time, and therefore we need to wait for the problem to be fixed before we can get back to our evaluation process. And our cute, fun-loving little child or client might not want to wait during that. So that could be a little problematic per se with the Tele-AAC. Continuing with a couple hurdles, barriers with Tele-AAC. Because like I always tell everybody who knows me, and for any of you who are on right now, I am a realist. So I do see the positive in things, and I do see the negative, and then I kind of look right down the line in the middle. And so I include both positive and negative no matter what it is that I do. And so I understand that when you're thinking about Tele-AAC and evaluations, it's such a broad scope. right? We can talk about eye gaze, we can talk about switch access, we can talk about direct selection, we can talk about a variety, low tech, mid tech, high tech, ASL. There is no one thing that makes AAC, and that's what makes it even more unique to consider our options via an online platform for AAC evaluations. So we're all aware, obviously, in-person evaluations are more optimal for a few reasons for those who have some more of the low incidence concerns. So a few reasons like gross motor, fine motor needs, meaning possibly having like an OT or PT readily available. That's obviously might not be a thing with Tele-AAC, or strategically will take a lot of collaboration to make that happen. So those sort of supports in person or on the spot are much easier. For me personally, just like I mentioned jokingly when this started, observing demeanor, body language is much easier in person than on telepractice and Tele-AAC. So it's not to say it can't happen, but you might not get the whole picture, you know, with camera angles and what have you. But when in a bind, or when in COVID, or geographic location situations that just don't support an SLP with the knowledge in this area, it's important to know that one can fall back on Tele-AAC. Clearly, an in-person evaluation decreases the stressors of HIPAA and other privacy concerns. You don't have to worry about a signed business agreement, a BAA, or other secure online platforms. I think a lot of us sometimes forget about that piece of it, you know, knowing what kind of Wi-Fi secure setup that they have, you have, etc. Little nuances such as not worrying about who's in your background, or like the phone that just went off in my background because I had an emergency and I'm no longer at my own house. So, you know, you can't predict all the things that might happen. So the people who might show up in your background or in their background who might accidentally hear or see something, why it might not seem like a big deal, you know, depending on where your four walls are or lack thereof, you know, those sort of stressors about privacy, you know, are there more so on tele than they are in person. And then clearly an in-person AAC evaluation allows for more of an in-the-moment findings. So what I mean by that is when you do your fact finding and you read all the reports and you understand in your mind, you understand the case history, you've even watched your videos of the observations, you know, a few different times just to make sure you caught every nuance. You did all that, and yet you still might not know exactly all the pieces that you do. And so the easiest example, obviously, is something as simple as a key guard, or something as simple as you're not changing the hardware, but you're doing a little switch within the hardware, a software setting change, or a user area change, something like that. Not to say that they can't happen with Tele-AAC, but on the spot, you know, I can much more efficiently and very quickly change that if I'm in person. So some things you have to consider, again, is client candidacy. And in normal AAC talk, I despise using the word candidate, and I think we can all agree on that. But when discussing telepractice, there's a time when we have to weigh the pros and cons if this is appropriate, this sort of platform, things to consider, you know, and that's when some of these hurdles might come in. And you can read some of the other ones here with our support personnel. We have to think about the availability of the AAC systems, how time-consuming Tele-AAC, I mean, AAC in general, doing an appropriate evaluation with evidence-based practice, it can be very timely. Doing it via Tele-AAC, as some methods I'll talk about soon, it could be even more, take even more time. So the support personnel, again, I don't mean to offend, but I am an honest person. So the people who call on us, or maybe I should just say me, so the people who call on me can also be the ones who might be part of the hurdle, and they don't mean to be. And I mean that kindly. I also mean that they have a lot of things on their plate, right? Like, again, let's be realistic. And so they might need some mental, emotional support, ample education in this area. They might have tons of questions that might limit our time actually with the client. So therefore, that's where the time-consuming part comes in. We might have to plan other sessions just with the support personnel and not with the client directly. Obviously, the financial bottom line comes into play when we're thinking about all that. And the tips and tricks that we're going to be asking of this support personnel, you know, we really just have to trust that, or they have to trust us, and whatever it is that we're asking of them is for a reason, and that we are, you know, doing or asking certain things, like don't prompt, or prompt a certain way, or please just wait. And when we're providing all these amazing tips, you know, like s'more and all the things, we're doing this for a reason. They don't always want to read the research articles with you, right? So you can't go spamming their inbox full of these amazing articles. So sometimes that can be a little bit of a hurdle. Eye contact, and as we know, it's a big part of understanding a person as a whole, understanding the pragmatic abilities of a client. I'm not saying eye contact is required, but it is, eye contact does impact the sense of dignity of our client, and having it helps build that rapport and that trust. So depending on angles of our camera, we might have issues to ensure proper and appropriate eye contact. Higher levels of organization are obviously needed. We'll be talking a lot about that organization. And then again, the financials. There's a lot of financial hurdles in my mind when it comes to Tele-AAC due to some of the timely issues and some other things. Okay. 1 second as we move on. Let me just close out some things here. Okay. So I apologize if you're experiencing a lag. I'm not I didn't say it outright, but we have a horrific storm that went through. And so I'm dealing with some pretty bad winds as we speak. And just grateful that I have electric in the location that I am at. So if the lag continues, just let me know. Moving on to some considerations and that telecandidacy. You can see here sensory needs, physical abilities, endurance, cognitive, behavioral, attention, motivation. I want assurance that they can see the monitor and hear the speakers. You know, those are obviously first and foremost. When I'm listing these qualities and characteristics, I immediately think of Tracy Kovac's AAC profile. It's a great checklist and inventory to see these different communication competencies that were well researched in Janice Light's late 80s work. I always go straight to those competencies when I'm looking at the overall picture of my clients. And of course, always remembering the social, cultural, and linguistic variables as well. Some of the individuals need proper amplification, perhaps some direct connection to an amplification device like a hearing aid, cochlear implant, what have you. So that's where it's important thinking of the technology that they're using. I have some families who are trying to use their phones. It's the only thing they might have available. And so you just want to make sure that they're making the best choice of a technology to determine the most appropriate ahead of time, because that's really important so that they feel that they're getting the best experience with you when you are having your session. Other things, obviously, speech to text technology might be a great thing to have in place, closed captioning. And Google Chrome has some amazing extensions, or Chromebooks in general, to make this really easy for you. And I do this during my sessions just for that ability. For the visually impaired, we'll need the ability to enlarge images, the cursor size, print, text to speech, which is the opposite, obviously. Output might be needed. So these are things you need to think about also with the device or the SGD, whichever needs to have significant customization available, you know, with cell sizes and what have you. But their technology, before even considering AAC, needs to be ready and available for these needs, these sensory needs that they might have. So again, that's more organization on your end, and the pre-session thoughts that need to be considered. The physical abilities and endurance are also very important. So I have some pictures here, you know, with key guard, touch guard, without one. And when shipping a device, I have to obviously take serious consideration of how I'm shipping a device to my clients, you know, with the key guard, without the key guard. And again, this is a little overgeneralized. We're specifically talking about a direct select. I'm not mentioning my eye gaze or any of the other alternative access users right now. But what I find that might be easier is actually shipping it with the key guard on, with whatever setup that I already determined. And the reason I say that is because it's easier to take it off than it is to teach a family sometimes to put it on. And by the time they put it on, we might have lost the attention of our client and then have to instruct them, the caregiver, on how to not only install it, but then how to rein the client back in. So it's just something to consider. A little tidbit right there is I use the key guard more often than not in the beginning of my evaluation session for a variety of reasons. And then I can always obviously pull it off and rein it back in without the need of that key guard. But there's obviously attention span concerns, movement breaks, sensory needs, all are tied in together. And so you have to have them planned ahead of time, and you need to talk to the family to understand what their needs are so that you can be best prepared. Other things to think about, the behavioral needs need to be addressed and discussed prior. So if the client who is most familiar or comfortable with using a choice board or a first end board, some other kind of token economy, that needs to be discussed with the support personnel or parent, caregiver, whoever it is, the behavioral team even, before, just to ensure that you're ready. And it could be your version of it, or potentially it even needs to be there. So that's a discussion that you need to have ahead of time, because the session will not go well if those parameters are not in place. And there are some online supports, you know, like a visual timer or things like that you can have available during the session. And not to make the evaluation session like a therapy session, but in the same token, we need to do what they're comfortable with and kind of familiar with within their routine. Especially if Tele-AAC is so new, I like to try to find some sort of mechanism that feels like sameness to them, that feels like something that they're comfortable and had experience doing in other platforms. The support personnel, staff, parent, whoever it is with you, they need to fully understand their role that they play in this process. So I'm sure some of us might have run into this just during the pandemic that we're in currently. So they need, what I mean by that is they need to understand that they're directly involved. So they need to be off their phone. They need not to have distractions. They need to understand the plan. They need to be ready to document. And so it kind of makes them feel like, whoa, hold on. And they're like, I'm not the therapist. I'm not the teacher. Why am I documenting anything? Many times we find the support personnel consider themselves as like a babysitter, even when they truly are so grateful for the support and the help that you're providing them, they still kind of just feel like that person who needs to make sure that the computer doesn't turn off or that their child doesn't run away or something. But they need to understand their role is so much more important, because ultimately they need to turnkey whatever it is that you're teaching or whatever it is that you're looking for. They need to turnkey that and support in generalization outside of the session. And that's why I mentioned before that you may need additional sessions specifically for training, both implementation sort of training and troubleshooting technology training. I make it very clear when I'm doing one or the other to say, like, no, this is a technology-based sort of training. You know, we can have a separate implementation training, you know, specific to whatever it is that I'm trying to target. And then obviously the support personnel is assisting with scheduling most times versus the client, him or herself. And we do need them kindly and gently, but to control any behaviors that might happen or to support in decreasing or eliminating any exterior things such as my phone ringing that might occur during your time together. The AAC selection and criteria. This one I think is obviously the most important. And I feel that with Tele-AAC, there's a little less wiggle room in my eyes, because again, you're not physically there with your bag of tricks. So how many of you are like me and you get to the site, no matter where it is, you know, in a home or in a clinic or you name it, school, and you pull out, you know, one or two huge bins that are on wheels, right? And you're lugging them along. Obviously, that's not occurring on the Tele-AAC platform. So understanding this profile is crucially important to ensure that you're selecting the options that close fit this profile, and doing your feature matching is just so crucially important. So when I'm considering these features, I tend to consider the attention, cognitive, behavioral needs, after obviously the overt things such as visual, gross, fine motor needs. And I believe strongly in motor planning. So therefore, I do consider my motor planning AAC systems as one of the first and foremost features, because even someone with good attention or no behavioral concerns, even some good cognitive skills, would still rather be more efficient in their communication, and that motor planning philosophies, which I'm not going to obviously dive into completely, it's a separate webinar, can really support them with that. And I really think about all those things before I start making my selections, before I start contacting my companies that I work with, before I start mailing out devices or asking a company to mail out a device. But with that, my philosophy is always the quicker someone can get their message out, the better, right? The quicker they find success, the more motivation they have, the easier this whole process will be. And so that's why I do gleam to those systems with motor planning first. But we also have to always consider, you know, durability, lifespan, flexibility of the language system. Whatever language system you're looking at, it's not just about today and not just about August. It's about, and not even just about the 2020-21 school year. It's about the lifespan. They say hardware is supposed to last approximately 5 years. Some insurances are beyond pleasant and they say 3, but the reality is it's 5 years. So in a 5-year period, I want to make sure that this client has enough language and linguistic capabilities within this system. And I have to think about that before I go sending them any device, because if I send them something that isn't going to meet their needs in 3.5 years, then why are we wasting our time? So those are things that I consider, that so if I'm not in person, you know, and I have to contact a company and make those calls and make sure I get those systems available, or my own systems that I'm mailing out, these are all things I think about, including the warranties and tech support. Because when I'm not available, and I need to know that there's someone else that they can contact, you know, when there isn't a person such as myself, doesn't need to mean me specifically, but if it was, you know, just a piece of technology they pulled off a shelf or they bought off of Facebook Marketplace, they're certainly not calling the previous owner, right? So I need to think about all these features and qualities in my systems before I go and make that selection. So in the live interactive sessions, in person and online, you getting the documentation, reviewing like we talked about, you organize all that information, you select your video conferencing tool. So obviously here today we're using GoToWebinar. I'm sure we're all very familiar with this system, because it's been out for quite some time, with Zoom, Google Meet. So these are the things I was mentioning a few slides back when thinking about HIPAA and thinking about, you know, security compliance. You have to think about which systems provide that for you. I know a lot of families just say like, oh, can we Skype or can we FaceTime? You need to be very careful with that. And those are things I think about. But more importantly, when thinking of the video conferencing tool, I think about the features that that tool itself is going to provide me, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. I then go and schedule it. And I know that sounds silly, like of course you schedule it, but when you schedule it, you really want to maybe schedule out a few sessions. Block yourself all the time, because you can always take it back out of your schedule, but know that these are going to take you more time than you will ever be able to predict. So schedule it. You might not even have to tell them all the sessions you scheduled, but just go ahead and schedule it. myself, the way that I've been finding it works best, and everybody's a little different, but I really like to do things myself. So after I decide which equipment I feel that I would like to use, and I am not using my own library that I have, which I know is atypical. I know a lot of clinicians don't have their own library of systems. Then I would contact the company and I have them ship the device to me. I don't want to put it on the families to program the device. I think that adds such an extra layer of stress. So after I get the system, I program it and I immediately send it out to the family. Again, understanding when my scheduled time is. So I need a lot of time between. So I have that shipped to me, I ship it to them. I even, depending on which company it is, you know, and they're gracious enough to give me a return label, I keep that in the box. I explain to the parents they're going to ship it back, not me, most times. And it works really well. I do that pre-teaching that I talked about. So before I even get online with my client, I do that pre-teaching. I make sure we have our evaluation, we have our time together. I have on any sort of data collection that's available within that language system, within that AAC system, LAM, language activity monitoring. I'm sure you guys are familiar with LAM, and then obviously realized language and all the things. I have that on and ready. Obviously, I talk to the parents about it. And then I do these steps with another system. So after I have my session and we do the things, obviously, I still need to do what I would do in person. I need to evaluate more than one system. And I do just that. But within this process, I still make sure that all the other things, such as the monitors and the third technology, that everything is charged and ready, and that's part of that whole pre-teach support part. The great thing about Tele-AAC is that the AAC evaluation can be completely live and interactive, which would be obviously you and me right now. You know, our face is showing and we're having a session. Obviously, a lot of us at this point are familiar with teletherapy because of thank you to the past, 3-4 months of our life. With that, there's also that store and forward concept, which means a little bit even like I mentioned with our observations that are recorded, is that we can tell them what to do for evaluation per se. Try to do this, mom, try to model eat, try to teach this concept, eat and drink, do it at the mealtime, set this, camera pod that I put in the box with my device and put it on your dining room table and hit record, and then put it up in the cloud and email it back to me. Or a mix of both. So you can have a little hybrid there of the live and interactive sessions with a little store and forward concept. And I do love it when families send me, I actually just got one right before this session. I do love it when families are sending me videos of their little ones during our AAC trial times or any times, just let you know, great, all this hard work that we're all putting forth is really paying off. So I'm not going to harp just for the sake of time, but I really go out of my way to be even more organized on my Tele-AAC sessions than I do in person, because you need to understand all the pieces, because if you miss the piece, then the session can go really bad. So I really break down my session down to the greeting even. How am I going to introduce a session? What activity or intervention am I going to do? What kind of data am I collecting? How am I going to wrap up the session? And I talk about my role. I explain to the support personnel what their role is with this, which hardware, softwares are needed, and any sort of arrangement within their environment is needed so that they know ahead of time, like, make sure you have this available and out, make sure you have this book or this toy, make sure you put it away, at this time, so I have more of their attention, possibly. And so I make sure I have that completely organized, and I might even send it to them so they see as well. The technology, like I mentioned, Zoom, Google Meets, the go-to meeting, the various ones, I think about them. I tend to personally go for Zoom. I'm a big fan of it. And I don't have such a positive relationship with Google Meets, but that's just my preference. And obviously everybody's very different and unique in that, and that's okay. With that said, obviously, due to the privacy breach that occurred a few months ago, some school districts around me have banned Zoom, even though obviously they did update. but I need certain features, and that's most important for me to be successful, and not just me feel successful, but the family feels successful. I need screen sharing capabilities. That's really important. Document sharing. They're features similar to traditional teletherapy that you guys are obviously getting comfortable with these past few months. But I need them even more so available so that I can screen share my device. Controlled mouse support is really great, you know, for when you're doing some sort of interactive activity or game. Or even if you want them to activate an area or an icon, if you're using like New Voice Pass software, you know, having them be able to do that, if that's an option, you know, with their dexterity and fine motor. The whiteboard is great for typing and drawing and describing things, both a mixture of text and drawing there for the support personnel and for the client. Instant messaging and the chatting capability within the system, such as this one, which you guys are all doing now. When you have questions, it's going to you know, those who are organizing this event right now. Having that so you can guide the support personnel during the session without being so interruptive. The document camera, I see these questions all the time on Facebook. Having a great document camera, or just an extra iPhone or an extra iPad using the AirPlay. I turn on the camera there, and next thing you know, I can show my accent, and parents think that's just like the best thing since sliced bread. And they, you know, they love that. I can teach them how to quickly do that themselves. So now they're showing me their accent if we're doing something technologically based, and it's quick. So those are really important things to think about: where the camera is, what kind of capability the camera has, making sure they understand where their camera physically is placed, so we get the best picture of our client's gaze and our client's abilities when accessing whatever system we're talking about. Making sure the camera's not panned out too far, making sure it's not too close. Those are all pieces of the technology that I think about. And I really just like one system. And I really feel personally that Zoom gives it to me, but not to say other systems don't. It's just a level of comfort specifically. For the evaluation, I'm not going to turn it into a therapy session, but obviously a lot of the things that you guys are familiar with for therapy work during the evaluation. I want first and foremost the same thing I want in person. I want to get their motivation. I want to pique their interest. And from there, I want to see their skill set on the things that I'm looking for. It's not, you know, I need to still look at all levels of AAC competency, you know, them operating and navigating pages per se, or them going from one icon to two icons, them understanding icon sequencing, whatever it might be. I'm still looking for the same things via Tele-AAC as I would in person. In person, I might obviously not be using websites. I'd be using maybe more toy-based things, but you can be creative and you can use your own materials. You can ask the family for their materials, ask the family to email you photos, or they can share their photos on their own screen so that you can talk about things that they firsthand experienced. And you can incorporate that right into your evaluation, and things clearly that are motivating for them to want to talk about, they'll be more interested, and they're going to stay with you for a longer period. I know I mentioned that the pre-training, ongoing training for our support personnel, our caregivers, is really, really important. Unfortunately, this does come down to time, and this does come down to financials for some, and I do understand and respect that, but I can't harp enough on that training piece. Creating videos ahead of time to support some of the things you're talking about is really important. So have it kind of as a little pool or a little library that you can go back to and say, oh, I was talking about this. Let me send you a video of what a good example of what that meant, whether it be, you know, wait time, or whether it be teaching them not to start to navigate to something for their child or their client on the other side. You know, some of the things that you don't realize you need to teach because you could physically show, those are the things you want to make sure you take a video of so that you can easily just send that to them or show it via your screen share. You want to be creative with your your teletherapy tactics, obviously, you want to go over some of that data stuff together. If they really feel like they're a team member and they can see the result of the things they are or are not doing, then they're going to be more invested, and they're going to be able to be in it to win it and stay sustained for all those other sessions that are needed. So whatever the activities that we're doing during those sessions to assess the different AAC system, we need to do it again. After we go through the evaluation with one tool, we're going to need to have a time period on that potentially, and then mail out another system or have it already available, depending on how many devices you ship the first time. So when we do these activities and these things with the other system, then we can objectively document, access abilities, visual attention, physical attention, motor abilities, endurance, etc. And that's super critical. Just like you would in person, you'll want to organize some charts and let people see your intentions. Show them what your plan of attack is and with what words and how you're going to use them. Give them concrete examples, and that will help them along the way. And it helps just take the pressure off of them when they can understand where you're going and where your thought process is. More so, it also helps you be objective, and so you can document better when you're comparing devices A and B. If you were looking at this circumstance or this activity, try to look at that activity with the other device. Or if you're looking at this word, how were they able to access this phrase on the one device? Remember that, because you're going to want to try to do that with the other one, if at all possible. Implementation plan is another document that I like to share with the support personnel. And remembering that AAC is fluid and that there's not one system that's always best. So you can still incorporate, if they're using sign language or if they're using other sort of modalities or means, it doesn't need to be a speech generating device. But you do need to remember to be explicit, because families are going to ask, well, can they sign over using it, or do they have to use the SGD, things like that. So if you gave examples where it could be okay versus another time where we want to encourage something with voice output, whatever it is, you want to have it spelled out. And it also gives the family time when they see this, and later they can probe and trial the systems that you feel are working. So most importantly is what I find is treating this Tele-AAC session almost like a fun quest. I'm not sure if that's the right word. I do what I do in person. I have the same thought process. I don't let the technology be overwhelming. I think a lot of the hurdle has been technology, and as we are getting more familiar, and that has nothing to do with our normal evaluation process and who we are as evaluators. That's a separate thing that you can spend different time to go and make sure you get a webinar specific to the platform that you feel comfortable with or that you're allowed to use. I think it's most important also to build these relationships with these companies such as PRC Sotella. They're doing a great job with their family discovery program with loaning out devices. They've been completely okay with shipping them directly to me versus to my families, understanding that it is for different families that I have so that I can go ahead and program it. And I do different user areas, and I program my vocab builder, or I program whatever is needed, hide, show. I do it all ahead of time, but I have a plan. So once A is working and I want to excel to next, I already know what that is. So if A is not working, I know I can go to B, and whatever that looks like. And again, making sure that everybody has the patience to know that once this system A is finished, I will be moving on to system B. And that's just really important. Implementation obviously also includes the strategies, and that's the biggest teaching part, because I always tell my families, don't worry about the technology. Let me be the person who's going to support you with that technology, or use tech support, and all the other people. You most importantly is you need to understand how to support the communication of your significant other, of your child, the student. and teaching them the modeling and whatever prompting strategies or hierarchies you're going to use, and when they're appropriate and who needs to do them. And since it's Tele-AAC, is I can say, hey, like, can we have a session, please, where his sister is available and she can sit with us. This doesn't have to be just on the support personnel, i.e. the parent. This can be on a larger scope. You know, I have individuals who obviously have 24-hour nursing. If they're all on board and with permissions, there's no reason why I can't pull in the nurse. She's with her potentially more than any other person, right? And that's really important to make sure that we're understanding who all those players are and that they all feel comfortable, because this isn't on any one person. And then in the comments, when I'm able to email this ahead of time to my families, they can write their questions in there, or they can give me examples when it actually did work out. And so it's great to see that. Okay, so we are winding down here. Anybody have any questions for any of that information?
Yes, we have a handful of questions for you, Kristy. I'm gonna.
Sure. And again, I sincerely apologize for the phone. It's not my house and I don't know how to turn it off.
No problem. One of the questions that came up was, could you tell us what the LAM stands for again?
Language activity monitoring. So most devices this day and age have some sort of data logging, language activity monitoring, LAM, built into the system. So for example, when I'm using the Touch Chat Express with Word Power, when I'm using the Prio LAMP Words for Life, or the Accent with Unity or LAMP Words for Life on the Accent, I turn on the LAM, the data logging, so that I can go and retrieve that information either from the cloud on Realized Language or with the flash drive, whatever it is, depending on which system it is. And it's not just specific to those. There are other systems that have other versions of language activity monitoring or data logging. And I just find that that's really important, because you can see the times it is used. And if you're focusing on, again, in the beginning, I look for immediate mastery. So therefore, if we're looking specifically for just the handful of words that we were targeting, I can see all of that on my LAM. And so I can say, great job, kudos mom and dad, or whoever I'm talking to, like, you really rocked it. I can see when I'm looking at these files that, it was used so much, whether it be through modeling, prompting, or them, the client themselves accessing it. That's its purpose. And so I can look through that, and we use that as a teaching tool during the evaluation process, and also as a way to prove that this device works or doesn't work. This ultimately comes down to the same evaluation report document that insurances are looking for. So the LAM just gives it more in-depth description as to the success of the trials.
Perfect. And then a couple people had asked about if you were positioning your camera to see what they're directly selecting versus using just what you're seeing of them, and have you found a best preference on that during the evaluation?
Sometimes for the quick and easy, because again, I do outweigh the pros and cons of how much stress I'm asking of my support personnel. I think that does come into play, when we're thinking of intrinsic and extrinsic barriers. The extrinsic would obviously be the environment and the people in which who are supporting our client. If they can handle it, then I will ask them sometimes to have a camera back there with obviously the system, the laptop or computer system that we're using that already has a different camera as well. Sometimes you just have to take the parent's word of what they're accessing as well. If parent sometimes records things during our session on their end, because you can see things from a different light, because it's not just about their hand or their finger, but sometimes I realized later that he got antsy after I requested this of him, X, and so I wouldn't necessarily be paying attention to that at some given moment. And so being able to come back to that and having that recorded. I mentioned, you know, kind of store and forward concept. So even though they're with me during the session, there still might be a recorded session going on their end, and then I can get that later, and that is helpful too. So depends on the client and depends on the technological savviness that I can teach to the support personnel, but most times it just tends to be directly from the screen.
Perfect. And there are quite a few questions that we won't be able to get to, and so we just wanted to let everyone know that we'll pass the questions on to Kristy, and she can respond to them as she's able. But one that did kind of pop up quite a bit, and I know state by state might be a little different, but maybe talking a little bit about going from your evaluation with a device that you sent out into trial, how long are you doing in between those different device trials with the evaluation?
No, yeah, there are definitely different requirements. I think that is state by state or even sometimes insurance by insurance. Mm-hmm. But what just happened to us last month, we had an individual, we sent out a device, and they were dead set against it. So there's no reason in the world that I would obviously wait the 4 weeks that I allotted in my calendar after going through a couple sessions and encouraging parent and providing different tips and techniques. I'm not going to make that client keep trying for that 4 week period. So I'm not sure if that's making sense or that's just being pretty specific to one scenario. But I do like to give them ample opportunity. So we do tend to give a 4 week. During this Tele-AAC right now, we're giving them a few weeks because it takes so much time on our end and the parents' end to understand our end to teach what we're looking to get out of the sessions. So if it's an immediate adverse reaction for whatever reason, clearly I go back to always wanting independence, mastery, motivation first and foremost. So I'm going to potentially just put a kibosh on that one and move on. But overall, I would give them 3 to 4 weeks on a system if all the training is going well, you know, our sessions are going well, both with the client and the parent before I move to the next one.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kristy, for this great presentation. As we mentioned, there are still quite a few questions that we weren't able to get to, and we'll pass them along to Kristy, and she can respond as time permits. We want to thank all our participants for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our guest webinar and look forward to seeing you for future webinars. The recording for the webinar will be on the PRC brand YouTube channel, as well as our Saltillo and TouchChat YouTube channels in a couple of days. Please remember, there will be a survey that pops up as you leave the webinar. We would love your feedback and let us know about other webinars you'd be interested in. And then you have 15 days to send us your completed ASHA forms to receive the CEUs for ASHA registry, and you will get a certificate of attendance in the email that will follow. Give us about 24 hours to get that email out to you. And if you have not received it in a day or so, then you are able to reach out to us at info@prentrom.com to ask about that. So thank you again, Kristy, and thank you for everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.